Hi, everyone. As we are now in colder space, I thought to bring the burning heat back up. So I am Anne Bessemans. I am the proud founder of Research. And today I will talk about an architecture of legibility, mapping typographic visibility to modern reading strategies. Let me begin with an image that a reviewer of this work offered me, perhaps without intending it as a compliment. They described this research as rearranging the pieces of a jigsaw puzzle that can never be fully completed using the pieces we have. I want to accept that image, not as a criticism, but as an honest description of what typography and reading research actually is. Reading is complex, multifaceted activity. The puzzle does not have a fixed solution. But the question is not whether we can finish it. The question is whether we are assembling it more intelligently than before. And I want to argue today that we are, and that we need to be urgently, because the table on which we are working has fundamentally changed the shape. That is the core claim of this talk. Not that typography is important, you know that. Not that legibility matters, you know that too. The claim is more specific, that the conventions which have long governed how we design for reading were built from a reading landscape that no longer fully exists, and that the taxonomy of reading strategies, grounded in both design research and emerging science of how people actually read today, offers a more honest and more useful framework for designers navigating that changed terrain. Before we can talk about visibility or invisibility, legibility or readability, we need to be clear about what typography actually is, because the word is used too loosely, too often, and in ways that carry hidden assumptions. The definition I return to is Stanley Morrison's from 1936. Typography is the art of arranging printed materials in a way that best aids the reader's comprehension. It is not the creation of letters, that is type design. It is not drawing of letters, that is lettering. Typography is distinguished by two essential properties, reproducibility and modularity. It is an open system where lettering sculpts something unique. Typography stacks modules, Lego blocks, not clay. And from that modular openness comes its power to serve radically different readers, genres, and purposes. We can divide that modular system into two complementary registers. Microtypography concerns the design of individual letter forms, being the decisions that govern whether a character is recognized quickly and without effort. Macrotypography concerns the organizations of those forms into a page, a screen, a navigable space, being grids, hierarchy, spacing, the relationship between text and images. Both matter, and a critical point that I want to make early. Much of what has been written about typography's role in reading focuses almost exclusively on the micro level, on the legibility of individual characters. The macro level, how layout structures guide the reader's eye, how hierarchy signals what a text is for, how the spatial architecture of a page shapes whether we can skim, scan, or immerse, that has received comparatively less rigorous attention in terms of how it maps onto actual reading behavior. And this talk is principally about that gap. Typography is, in a deep sense, a technology of convention. Centuries of accumulated practices have produced agreements, largely invisible, largely also unspoken, about what different kinds of text should look like. The in 1470 designed letter forms of Jansen remain the structural foundation of most text typefaces we use today. A reader glancing at a broadsheet newspaper recognizes it as a newspaper before reading even a single word. These are not arbitrary facts. They are the products of long ergonomic negotiation between the human visual cognition and the printed form, a gradual tuning of design to the natural patterns of how people read. This is the insight behind what came to be called invisible typography, the tradition most famously articulated by Beatrice Ward in 1956 through her crystal goblet metaphor. The goblet should be transparent. It exists to convey wine, not to call attention to itself. Typography on this account is most successful when it disappears, when the reader passes through it directly into the content. Morrison put it plainly: any arrangement of type that comes between the author and the reader is by definition wrong. This position had enormous practical and theoretical influence. It shaped partly the Swiss typography of the mid-20th century, the strict grids, the uniform sans-serif typefaces, the conviction that the designer's role was fundamentally self-effacing. The content should think, the designer should not. I want to be respectful of that tradition without being bound by it, because the crystal goblet, beautiful as it is as a metaphor, contains an assumption that does not hold universally and increasingly does not hold at all. It assumes that writing is simply the transcribed speech and that typography's only job is to get out of the way of that transcription. But look at any complex text. Look at the bold headings, the paragraph breaks, the italic emphasis, the navigational apparatus of a scientific journal or a legal document or an educational textbook. These are not failures of transparency. They are not typographic noise. They are functional architecture. They are structures that carry meaning that no amount of prose can carry on its own. Giovanni Lusu made this critique with particular clarity. The invisible model overlooks the essential role of visual elements in conveying meaning that goes beyond speech. And Gerard Unger offers a more nuanced resolution, what he calls typographic silence, being the moment when a reader has acclimated to a design. No matter how striking it may have seemed at first, it is slowly fading from view. Visibility, in other words, is not a fixed property of a typeface or a layout. It is a relationship between a design, a reader, and time. It's relative, contextual, and flexible. This is not a reason to abandon conventions, but it is a reason to understand them more precisely. The design process, as I see it, follows a clear sequence. Identify the editorial genre, understand the conventions that govern it, then make deliberate decisions about where to follow those conventions and where to depart from them. Convention is the baseline. Departure from the convention is a tool. Neither is inherently correct. Now I want to talk about urgency, because the reading landscape has changed in ways that make this conversation not merely academic, but practically necessary. One reviewer of this work suggested that because much of the foundational literature is old, going back to the 30s and the 70s, the contribution is therefore not new. I want to address that directly. It is not the age of the sources that determines the novelty of a contribution. New syntheses, reinterpretations, and applications of established frameworks can be truly valuable. And in the case of typography and reading, there is a specific reason why historical re-evaluation is now more urgent than ever. On the micro level, the level of the letter forms, remarkably little has changed since the 15th century. The basic conventions of text typography have proven extraordinarily stable. A well-set Roman text today is not fundamentally different from one set 300 years ago, and readers recognize it as such. That stability is not stagnation, It is successful ergonomic calibration. But the macro level, the level at which text is organized, navigated, and encountered, that has changed profoundly. In the last 2 decades, the reading landscape has expanded to include various digital media, devices, as well as content. As a consequence, readers constantly move between different reading modes, often with a single sitting. And here is the critical problem. Most of the digital typographic conventions we currently use are direct translations of print conventions onto screen. That transfer is not wrong. It carries necessary conventionality with it, but it's incomplete. The spatial and navigational properties of digital reading are truly different from print, and those differences have demonstrable consequences for comprehension. Research on print versus digital reading is instructive here. Meta-analysis by Delgado and colleagues, as well as Clinton's systematic review, have consistently found that reading comprehension for informational, that is, expository text, is worse on screen than on paper, and that this disadvantage does not diminish with greater exposure to digital reading. If anything, it increases. One proposed explanation is that readers adopt shallower processing style in digital environments. Another is that scrollable text creates spatial instability. The reader loses the physical anchoring that a printed page provides, and with some of the navigational certainty that supports comprehension. Mangen and colleagues have pointed to the unavailability of the whole text, the inability to feel where you are in a document, as a specific disadvantage of screen reading for complex text. These are not arguments against digital reading. They are arguments for understanding it more precisely, for recognizing that digital environments place different cognitive demands on readers, and that typographic design needs to respond to those demands rather than simply inheriting print conventions by default. The emerging territory of augmented reality adds a further dimension. Studies examining augmented reality in reading and learning contexts suggest consistent findings. AR tends to increase reader engagement and satisfaction, but this engagement does not reliably transfer into a better comprehension. The reasons are instructive. Where AR implementations violate the principles of spatial and temporal contiguity, so where information and its visual counterpart are not co-located and co-temporal, the cognitive load increases without corresponding gain in understanding. Meyer's cognitive theory of multimedia learning offers a useful frame here. There is a limited capacity in each processing channel, and design that distributes information poorly across those channels creates extraneous or irrelevant load rather than supporting good understanding. The typographic question embedded in all of this: how does visual structure guide the reader through these varied, demanding environments? How does hierarchy, differentiation, and the balance between image and text help or hinder the specific kind of reading a particular text requires? This brings me to the central proposal of this work: a taxonomy of reading strategies in relation to typographic structure. The premise is straightforward, though its implications are far-reaching. The comprehensibility of a text depends not only on its content, but also on its design. Most readers experience this without being aware of it. Design shapes reading behavior below the threshold of conscious attention. But designers and design researchers need to work with this consciously. Modern readers do not read in a single mode. They skim, they scan, they consult, they search, they read intensively and at length, they read even on a glance. These are not merely different speeds of the same activity, they are cognitive distinct operations that place different demands on the text, and that responds differently to typographic structures. A text designed for deep, sustained immersion, like in a novel, a philosophical argument, requires a different typographic approach from a text designed for rapid consultation, like a reference guide or a train timetable. And both of those differ from a text designed for selective searching, like a scientific paper with a specific result to locate. The taxonomy I'm proposing maps these reading modes across two sets of criteria. One set is linked to the attributes concerning the reader. The other set deals with the typographical qualities of the reading material. Along these sets, a range of reading modes can be positioned: scanning and skimming at the global low demand and informative reading on a glance slightly further in. Consultative and searching reading moving toward the local higher demand, and intensive, in-depth research reading at the furthest end of the local high demand axis. Each position on this scheme implies a different typographic strategy. Global low demand reading is served by a more heterogeneous layout, macro typographic decisions, generous text-image ratios, and short reading times. Local high-demand reading is served by differentiated, homogeneous layouts, strong microtypographic precision, and the structural markers like headings, emphasis, hierarchy that enable the reader to navigate and comprehend complex information efficiently. This framework is not invented from nothing. It builds explicitly on earlier work. Wilberg in the 70s and the 90s introduced a system linking typographic structures to the design and the use of books, distinguishing 6 categories of reading relationship. Hochuli and Kinross emphasized that different reading modes and typographic situations are not only possible but necessary within a single reading object. Twyman's 1979 scheme for graphic language, organized around modes of symbolizations and methods of configuration, established that graphic communication must be consciously planned and that the continuum from linear to nonlinear reading is a fundamental axis of design decision-making. Waller's work from his 87 thesis through the pattern language approach, developed also with colleagues in 2012, argued that typographically structured text enables nonlinear reading and that reoccurring design patterns with genres signal to readers how to navigate the text. What is new here is not any of these insights individually. What is new is the synthesis, bringing together reading mode, reader profile, typographic criteria, and medium into a single coherent framework that operates across both print and digital environments. The taxonomy is medium agnostic by design because a reader skimming at a scientific abstract on a phone and a reader skimming the same abstract in a printed journal are performing the same cognitive operation, and the typographic principles that support that operation are substantially the same, even if their implementation differs. Lonsdale 2016 study is direct relevant here. She examined 3 typographic layouts for examination materials, all using search reading strategies, being scanning and skimming, and found that even without time pressure, the layout conforming to legibility guidelines was read fastest and show better task efficiency. Typographic structure measurably affects reading performance. That is not merely an observation, it is the empirical foundation on which a design framework can be built. I want to close by grounding this in practice and in the horizon ahead. The practical implication of this taxonomy is a shift in how designers approach typographic decisions, rather than asking what looks good, what is legible, both of which are necessary but insufficient. The question becomes, what kind of reading does this text require? What is the reader's goal? What cognitive demands does the genre place on them? And what typographic structure best supports that specific reading performance? This is not a recipe book. It's not a set of rules. One of the points I want to insist on in response to the criticism that asks for clearer empirical verdicts, for definite statements of what works and what does not, is that typography lives at the intersection of measurable function and irreducible play. Design research adds pieces to the puzzle. It does not eliminate the puzzle. I can show you 10 novels designed completely different that all read equally well. And the task of the design researcher is to abstract which variables are going to do the work in each case, not to collapse that variety into a single prescription. What we can say with increasing confidence is that typographic structure is not decorative. It's cognitive infrastructure. It shapes the routes through which readers access, navigate, and comprehend the text. And as the reading landscape continues to shift, as new platforms and new media create new demands, as augmented reality and AI-generated content introduce further variables, the need for a principled, flexible, evidence-informed framework for thinking about typography and reading only increases. The convention inherited from print are not wrong. They carry centuries of ergonomic wisdom, but they were not designed for a reader who moves in a single hour from long-form essay to a scrollable feed to an AR-enhanced educational text. They were not designed for cognitive conditions that digital environments create. Extending and re-evaluating those conventions for new context, that is the work. That is the architecture of legibility that this research is trying to build. So the puzzle will not be finished, but we can become better at reading the pieces we have and more deliberately about the ones we still need to find. Thank you.
Yeah. A few questions. Feel free to ask questions.
Yes.
Do I, can I speak from here?
For me, it's fine. I hope for the people at home as
It's
well.
better to get a bit closer because we want the online participant to hear.
Right. You just mentioned that the changes that are needed, you know, in the digital print versus before when you had the book written print. Now wondering what happened with RSS. Maybe I just stopped using it, but it seems to be a phase that came and then went. But I think, is it true you think the RSS is better suited to the digital world? Because
And what do you mean with RSS? Can you explain RSS?
RSS, I think they call it really simple syndication.
Okay.
A different way of displaying a web page. So you basically have just the text. And that seemed to be the wave of the future. Maybe it fits with what you're describing as far as changing how things are written for the digital world.
I don't think that it necessarily needs to go back to that text only. I think that now in how technology is evolving, that we should think more critical about how we can implement also in digital environments specific ways in how readers can navigate, basing on AR, VR, but also I think about how you bring movement into navigational structures on a template, trying to see. I think there is a lot of new research ahead of us.
Good.
Also for specific target audiences, like people with ADHD, there are already some promises that with some kind of movements, they can concentrate better. So yeah, that it's not yet, yeah, I think that still a lot of conventions should be thought about. It's not yet there, I guess.
Thank you, thank you.
Any more questions? You mentioned AI generated text. Now, as you very clearly pointed out, traditional typography helped to also contextualize the text. I would have different expectations opening the yellow press or a serious newspaper just based on the typographic conventions used. But how does this translate into a world of AI-generated texts, which is uniform, or at least by default, it's uniform in the way it's presented?
I don't have immediately an answer onto that. Within the taxonomy that I'm creating, I'm also considering how people are communicating with AI, because that's also a specific kind of form. It's linear, it comes with dialogue where you barely go back. It's also like, there is also kind of a structure. I think that specific kind of patterns might become visible, and those patterns, yeah, help shaping the recognition of that AI generated text.
So Lars, anybody?
Yeah, I want to mention something first about Enoch's question about RSS. I wonder if maybe the more modern thing that's happening is with Markdown. There's lots of text that are generated in this very simple plain text form with some minimal markup, but it doesn't even have multiple columns. There's no possibility of doing that. Simple paradigm. So it does put a lot of weight on the typographer to decide if it deserves any more complex treatment. And I wonder from your perspective, how do you recommend to typographers if they're creating typographic systems for publishers? Should they be as ambitious as possible, trying to imagine every kind of text that could be published there? That doesn't seem to be possible. You can't imagine every possibility. And then if you're working as a typographer within a system, should you be bold and break the rules more when the text demands it? It is, if you following the content, then you have to break the rules quite a lot, I think, according to what you're saying.
I think that definitely we can put some rules into question. Also depending on who is the target audience as well. Yeah, who's the reader? Yeah. So I think that some rules need to be broken for digital environments, because it seems that in print, they have all of the benefits over the digital environment. So the focus needs to be on the digital environment in how to improve the comprehension over there. And then I think a lot is still open to experiment and discover.
Maybe, I'm just wondering, maybe it needs to be, we need to be clear about when it's not a linear piece of text like these AI. They have pretty good typography, I think. I was very impressed when they first came out how good their typography was, but it doesn't work for many more complex texts, like, I don't know, some interlinear commentaries or footnotes and so on. Lots of diagrams. Maybe we need to be just clearer about the places where plain text approach with styles works and when it doesn't.
Yeah, most likely, yeah. Yes.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.